You want to grow your own food, you like the idea of stepping outside, picking something fresh, and eating it that same day. But somewhere between the watering schedule, the staking, the pruning, and the constant checking for pests, the whole thing starts to feel like a second job. And here's the thing, nobody tells beginners that exhaustion isn't a sign you're bad at gardening. It's usually a sign you picked the wrong plants. Some vegetables demand your attention every single day. Others are almost stubbornly willing to grow, no matter how busy your week gets. Today, we're counting down 9 vegetables that were basically built for people who want a productive container garden without living in it. They're forgiving when you forget to water. They're realistic about how much space you actually have on a balcony or patio. And they reward a small amount of effort with a surprisingly large harvest. Stick around, because the vegetable at number 1 might be the single most satisfying thing you can grow in a pot, and there's a reason it's saved for last. Quick note before we start. If you're the kind of person who wants more of these no-stress, high-reward container gardening ideas, hit subscribe and turn on notifications, because this channel is entirely built around growing more with less effort. Now, how did we rank these 9? Every vegetable on this list had to pass 2 tests. First, it had to genuinely thrive in a container, not just survive one. Second, it had to tolerate a missed watering day, an ignored week, or a bit of neglect without collapsing from there. We looked at productivity, how much usable food you get back for the space it takes up, how forgiving it is for a first-time grower, and how often you can actually harvest from it. Keep those criteria in mind, because you'll notice them come up again and again as the list gets more interesting. Let's start with number 9. Number 9, radishes. If patience isn't your strong suit, radishes might be the most satisfying vegetable you can grow. Because in as little as 3 to 4 weeks, you go from seed to something on your plate. That speed matters more than people realize. A slow-growing vegetable gives neglect more time to do damage. A fast one is often already harvested before problems even have a chance to show up. Radishes don't ask for much. A container as shallow as 6 to 8 inches deep is enough for most varieties, which makes them ideal for a windowsill box or a narrow railing planter where a deep container simply won't fit its scone. They want consistent moisture more than they want constant attention. So if you miss a day here or there, they're usually still fine. Those stretches of dry soil can make them turn woody or overly spicy scum. Here's a small mental picture worth holding on to. Imagine a container gardener who has 15 unused minutes, and a completely bare pot. Radishes are one of the few vegetables where that's genuinely enough time to start something that finishes before summer even gets going. They're also a fantastic way to fill gaps between slower-growing vegetables later on this list, which is part of why experienced container gardeners keep a few radish seeds on hand at all times. There's a catch. Though radishes bolt, meaning they'll rush to flower and lose quality if the weather gets too hot, too fast. So they work best in cooler stretches of the growing season rather than the peak of summer. Still, for sheer speed and reliability in a small space, they've earned their spot here at number 9. And speed is nice, but what about a vegetable that just keeps giving, harvest after harvest, without needing to be replanted? Number 8, Swiss chard. This is the vegetable equivalent of a plant that seems to shrug off a bad week. Swiss chard is a cut-and-come-again crop, which means you don't harvest the whole plant at once. You take a few outer leaves, leave the center intact, and the plant simply keeps producing new growth for months. For a busy container gardener, that changes the entire relationship with the plant wong. You're not managing a single harvest event. You're checking in occasionally and taking what you need. A container around 12 inches deep with reasonable width gives chard enough room to establish a strong root system, and once it's settled in, it tends to tolerate inconsistent watering better than many leafy greens, partly thanks to its thicker, more substantial leaves. It's also remarkably tolerant of partial shade, which makes it a strong option for a balcony that only gets a few hours of direct sun rather than a full day of blazing light. Picture a patio with a single large pot of chard tucked into a corner that gets decent but not perfect sun. While more particular vegetables might sulk in that spot, chard often just keeps producing, leaf after leaf, week after week. And there's a bonus most people don't expect. Chard is genuinely ornamental, with stems that can range from white to gold to deep red, so it doubles as a decorative container plant that happens to be edible hen. It earns its place at number 8 through sheer persistence. But our next vegetable brings something charred, doesn't real bulk, without a trellis in sight. Number 7. Bush green beans. Pole beans get a lot of attention, but they need a trellis, ongoing training, and vertical space that not every balcony has. Bush beans skip almost all of that. They grow compact, self-supporting, and rarely need staking at all, which is exactly what a low-effort container garden calls for. A container around 12 to 14 inches deep with decent width is usually enough to support several plants. And once they're established, bush beans tend to handle a missed watering day without much drama, especially compared to their pole-growing cousins. Here's what makes this one especially useful for a busy household. Bush beans tend to produce in flushes rather than one long trickle, so you can go from barely noticing any pods to suddenly having a genuine harvest within the same week, which makes them satisfying in a way that slower vegetables simply aren't. Imagine coming home from a long day and finding a container that quietly delivered enough beans for dinner without you doing anything differently that week. That's the appeal here. One thing worth knowing before you start: bush beans have a relatively concentrated harvest window compared to some other vegetables on this list. So successive smaller plantings every couple of weeks can keep the supply steady, rather than getting one big burst and then nothing nature's pains. Number 7 goes to bush beans for combining real productivity with almost no structural fuss. But if you want something that's not just easy, but genuinely difficult to kill, our next pick might be the most forgiving vegetable on this entire list. Number 6. Peppers. Sweet peppers, hot peppers, it doesn't matter much as a group. Peppers are remarkably well suited to container life, and they tend to handle inconsistent watering with more grace than a lot of vegetables twice their size. Part of the reason is their compact root system, which fits comfortably in a container around 14 to 16 inches deep, making them a natural fit for a sunny balcony rail or a cluster of pots by a back door. Peppers do want a good amount of direct sun, generally 6 or more hours, and they tend to reward that sun with a long, steady production window rather than one quick burst in season. Here's where container gardeners genuinely have an advantage over in-ground growers, because containers warm up faster than garden soil in spring. Peppers, which love heat, often settle in and start producing earlier in a pot than they would directly in the ground. There's also a quiet kind of drama in growing peppers that other vegetables don't offer. Watching a small green pepper slowly deepen into red, orange, or purple over several weeks gives you a reason to check on your container garden even on days when you don't strictly need to picture. The gardener who grew up thinking peppers only came from the grocery store, suddenly harvesting a windowsill's worth of jalapenos they grew themselves. That moment tends to make people fall in love with container gardening. If there's a caution here, it's that peppers can be slow to establish early on, so patience in the first few weeks pays off later with a much longer harvest season on. Number 6 goes to peppers for their resilience and their reliably long payoff. Next up is a category of vegetable that almost defines the phrase, keeps on giving. Number 5. Lettuce and salad greens. If chard is the plant that shrugs off a rough week, lettuce is the plant that turns a single container into an ongoing grocery-run, loose-leaf lettuce. Spinach, arugula, and similar greens can all be grown using the same cut-and-come-again approach, where you snip outer leaves and let the plant regenerate rather than pulling the whole thing at once. A container as shallow as 6 to 8 inches works for most salad greens, which means they fit almost anywhere, including narrow window boxes and tiered planters where deeper vegetables simply won't fit hand. Here's what makes this one especially useful for someone with limited space. You can pack multiple varieties into a single wide, shallow container, giving you a mixed salad growing in one spot rather than needing several separate pots. Salad greens generally prefer consistent moisture and partial shade during hot stretches. And while they're not indestructible, they tend to recover reasonably well from an occasional missed watering, especially compared to fruiting vegetables that are actively trying to ripen something wine. Now, if you think that sounds impressive, consider this: a well-managed container of loose-leaf lettuce can realistically be harvested every week or two for a large portion of the growing season, which very few vegetables can match in terms of sheer frequency. One thing to watch for is bolting in hot weather, when the plant shifts energy toward flowering and the leaves turn bitter. So cooler seasons or partial shade tend to extend the productive window considerably. For anyone short on time but craving something fresh and constant, lettuce and salad greens are hard to beat, which is exactly why they land at number 5. And speaking of constant harvests, our next vegetable takes that idea and adds something salad greens can't offer: real weight and volume from a genuinely small footprint. Number 4. Bush cucumbers. Regular cucumber vines can sprawl for feet in every direction, which sounds appealing until you realize your balcony doesn't have feet to spare. Bush and compact cucumber varieties solve that problem directly, staying far more contained while still producing a respectable harvest. Zucchini. A container around 18 inches deep with good width gives bush cucumbers enough room to develop a healthy root system. And while a small trellis or cage can help keep the vines tidy, it's often more about organization than necessity. With the compact varieties, cucumbers do prefer consistent watering, since inconsistent moisture is the most common reason for bitter-tasting fruit. So this is one vegetable where a simple mulch layer on top of the soil can make a noticeable difference in how forgiving it feels day to day. Here's an interesting fact worth knowing. Cucumber plants tend to produce more fruit when you harvest regularly, because leaving mature cucumbers on the vine can signal the plant to slow down overall production. Native signomy. In other words, picking them isn't just about eating fresh cucumbers. It's actively encouraging the plant to keep working. Imagine a small patio with a single well-tended cucumber plant that ends up supplying enough for salads and snacking through most of the summer, all from a container that takes up less space than a bicycle can. That's a realistic outcome for compact varieties under good growing conditions. Before we move on, quick reminder: drop a comment below with the vegetable you're already growing, or the one from this list you're most tempted to try, because it genuinely helps shape future videos on this channel. Number 4 belongs to bush cucumbers, for turning a small footprint into a surprisingly generous harvest. Our next vegetable takes that same idea of a compact plant with a big output and pushes it even further. Number 3. Compact zucchini and summer squash. Traditional zucchini plants have a reputation for taking over an entire garden bed, which is exactly why most container gardeners assume squash isn't for them, but compact and bush-type zucchini varieties, bred specifically for smaller spaces, change that equation considerably. They still need a reasonably generous container, typically 18 to 24 inches deep and wide, since squash roots like room to spread. But in exchange for that space, they deliver one of the most productive harvests on this entire list and mission. Here's the kind of story every container gardener eventually hears. 1. healthy zucchini plant can produce more than a single household can realistically eat. And that's not an exaggeration so much as a running joke among people who grow it, even scaled down to a compact container variety. Zucchini tends to stay remarkably productive once it gets going. Squash plants generally tolerate occasional mist watering, better than people expect, especially once established, though a dry spell during flowering can reduce how many fruits actually set wine. The real skill with zucchini isn't keeping it alive, it's keeping up with harvesting. Since the fruit can go from perfectly sized to oversized within just a couple of days. Picture a gardener who steps away for a long weekend and comes back to find zucchini the size of a baseball bat waiting for them. That's less a sign of neglect and more a sign of just how enthusiastically this plant produces. For sheer volume from a single container, compact zucchini earns its place at number 3, but raw volume isn't everything. And our next entry proves that sometimes the lowest effort vegetable of all isn't grown from seed at all. Number 2. Green onions and scallions. This one tends to surprise people because it barely feels like gardening at all. Green onions can be regrown directly from kitchen scraps. Simply place the root ends, with about an inch of white base still attached, in a shallow container of soil or even water, and new green shoots will typically begin appearing within days. A container as shallow as 4 to 6 inches is genuinely enough, which makes this one of the most space-efficient vegetables on the entire list. Easily tucked onto a kitchen windowsill that gets a reasonable amount of light. Here's what makes this one especially valuable for a busy household. Because you're regrowing from what would otherwise be thrown away, there's essentially no cost and very little setup involved, and the plant tends to tolerate inconsistent watering better than most vegetables its size, since the root structure is compact but resilient. You can snip the green tops as needed for cooking, and under favorable conditions, the plant will often continue regrowing new shoots for several rounds before it eventually needs to be refreshed. Imagine never running out of green onions for a recipe again, simply because the ones you almost threw away are quietly regrowing in a cup on your counter. That's a genuinely different kind of low-effort gardening than anything else on this list. And it's part of why this one sits so close to the top superfluous. If there's a limitation, it's that scallions won't bulk up the way a full onion would. So this is about a steady trickle of fresh greens, rather than a large single harvest greens. For turning almost nothing into an ongoing supply, green onions take number 2. And now, the vegetable that combines nearly everything this list has been building toward forgiving care, real productivity, and a payoff that container gardeners talk about more than almost anything else. Number 1. Cherry tomatoes, specifically compact patio and determinate varieties. If there's one vegetable that turns a hesitant first-time container gardener into someone who's hooked for life, it's this one. Determinate and patio-bred cherry tomato varieties are specifically developed to stay compact, which solves the biggest problem people associate with tomatoes: the assumption that they need a huge garden bed and constant staking to be worth growing. A container, around 14 to 18 inches in diameter, with good drainage, gives most compact varieties enough room to thrive, and a simple small cage is usually enough support, rather than the elaborate staking systems larger tomato varieties often require. Tomatoes do want a substantial amount of direct sun, generally 6 to 8 hours, and consistent watering does matter more here than with some of the tougher vegetables earlier on this list, since irregular watering can lead to cracked fruit or blossom end rot. But here's where container gardening actually works in your favor, rather than against you. A container makes it far easier to maintain that consistency, and a layer of mulch on top of the soil can meaningfully reduce how often you need to check on it. Here's the real reason this plant made it to number 1. Once a compact cherry tomato plant is established and producing, it tends to keep producing steadily for weeks, sometimes months, often delivering a small handful of ripe tomatoes every couple of days rather than one big harvest and then nothing for the right. For a lot of container gardeners, that daily or every other day ritual of finding a few sun-warmed cherry tomatoes becomes one of the most quietly satisfying parts of the entire season. There's something worth pausing on here. Picture handing a 5-year-old a warm cherry tomato straight off the vine for the first time. Or bringing a small container of them to a neighbor just because you had more than you needed mori. That's the kind of moment container gardening tends to create, and it's a big part of why cherry tomatoes consistently top lists like this one. Not just for productivity, but for the genuine joy they bring to the process. Number 1, and thoroughly earned, goes to compact cherry tomatoes. So there they are, 9 vegetables that prove a productive container garden doesn't have to be a demanding one. Notice what tied this whole list together. None of these plants were chosen because they're flashy or trendy. They were chosen because they forgive a missed watering day, they don't demand a huge amount of space, and they give back more than the effort you put into them. That's really the whole philosophy behind low-maintenance container gardening. Success doesn't come from working harder or watching every plant every single day. It comes from choosing plants that are already working with you instead of against you. If you're just starting out, you don't need to plant all 9 of these at once. Pick 1 or 2 that fit your space and your schedule. Get a feel for how forgiving they actually are, and let that early success build your confidence before you expand. A single pot of radishes or a regrowing cup of green onions is a perfectly reasonable place to begin. Before you go, subscribe if you'd like more practical, low-effort container gardening ideas like this one. And let me know in the comments which of these 9 you're most excited to try for Checkmingavouter. And if you're curious about turning that same balcony or patio into a space for growing fruit as well, there's another video on this channel that walks through exactly which fruit trees thrive in containers. With almost the same amount of effort, go check that one out next, and I'll see you there.